Okay, this is session 9. We're talking about working with families and communities of culturally diverse gifted students. And the article that we are focusing on is Parent Advocacy for Culturally Diverse Gifted Students by Dr. Grantham et al.
So we thought the authors had a couple of main goals, and so the first one is just to provide guidance for parents or gifted educators who are working with parents of culturally diverse students, and they suggest the use of the Gifted Program Advocacy Model, or GPAM, and the Advocate's Guide, and we'll kind of go over both of those later in the presentation. The rationale on page 138 states that school leaders and teachers need parents' help and companionship in serving the needs of their children.
Okay, another goal of the author was to show the benefits of parental advocacy. The reading stated that it helps teachers to understand the diversity of students' needs, increases the consistency of expectations, provides a more complete understanding of gifted behaviors, and it also makes parents become nonpartisan stakeholders in their child's education.
So the main points are summarized here. The purpose of parental advocacy is to hold gifted programs accountable, with the main purpose of promoting excellence and equity, which is kind of a thing that's been repeated through the program or through the course. The GPAM model you can see on Figure 1, page 140, and the Advocate's Guide, it's the Table 2 on page 142, kind of help parent advocates during the process. The GPAM is guided by the standards set by the National PTA, and then the fourth point were that there are 3 fundamental types of information that parents need to have prior to beginning the advocacy process, and those are listed there. I won't read them to you.
Okay, so there is the GPAM model, the phases, and we're going to discuss the phases of the GPAM model. So there were 4 phases, and you can find this on Figure 1 in page 140. There is needs assessment, to recognize the importance of their child's education, develop an advocacy plan for their child's education, and actually implement the plan for the next step. There are 3 action points for parents to take before these formal actions. There needs to be gifted program timelines, general testing issues need to be figured out, and gifted programs and policies and procedures need to be followed and figured out. And then finally, you would follow up with a follow-up and evaluation.
And then the other guide that was presented for parents was the Advocate's Guide for Assessment and Equity of Gifted Programs, and you can reference the table on page there. And so they talk about looking at these different equity domains, and they list the questions on page 142. So if we're looking at statistical analysis of the district and gifted enrollment, you ask questions like, what's the composition of the students' enrollment by demographic variables? So the things that we talk about with Dr. Ford's equity formula, you're looking at that same information. Well, the parents would be looking at the same information. Another domain was the gifted program notice. So an example question from that domain would be, is the notice provided annually to students and parents and guardians in a manner that is able to reach the majority of the community, not just parents who have, for example, internet access. Another domain was gifted program referral and screening process. So another sample question there would be, are the referral and screening criteria applied in a non-discriminatory manner? And for this one, so my background is in school counseling, and I thought that this domain in particular would be very beneficial for maybe working with the school counselor, because a lot of the information that they talk about there deals with systemic issues potentially. And then the final 2 domains, evaluation and placement of students, and then gifted program student participation.
Okay, so in conclusion, our takeaway from all this was that parental involvement and advocacy has a huge and positive impact on all stakeholders in the education process, students, parents, and teachers. Assistance is provided for parents via the GPAM and the Advocate's Guide. And one of our favorite quotes from the reading was, "If corn doesn't grow, nobody asks what's wrong with the corn." You can find this on page 144, and we think it's really applicative to helping kids out in their education.
And also just like looking at as educators and working in the school building, the implication is that we need to look at larger societal issues that negatively impact our culturally diverse gifted kids instead of just saying that there may be that the problem lies within them.
So a couple questions that we're going to pose for discussion. One, how are members of the advocacy team determined initially in the process? What are ways to build in accountability for schools to build these types of teams?
And then the third question, in my coursework, we talked a lot about how the public school systems in the United States are really built on this industrial model, or sometimes you may see them referred to as factory schools, which means that waste is an expected byproduct. So for all the students who are within the school building, they're being trained to do what have you, but you're always expected that there will be a group of students who are not um, going to be as successful, so they would be the waste. So this article, along with chapter 4 of Ford's book, talks about the role of societal and other environmental influences that negatively affect the underachievement of these students. So this made me think about the school ecological model, which we'll go to on the next slide in just a second. My question is, that was a lot of background, how does viewing students from the school ecological model perspective help to negate the flawed notion of intellectual inferiority? And so this is the model here, and it's Bronfenbrenner talks about the ecological perspective. For those of you who had developmental, this is really how different aspects of different systems affect individuals. So instead of looking at students from just within the school, how does the community play a role that they're from? How does the state that they live in play a role? How does the fact that they're in the United States, the different SES levels, how do they all play a role in their development or in their achievement at school? So that's it for us. We will put the questions up in the PowerPoint. Thanks for listening.